This is a video response on the topic of thesis. The game master is also a player. The game master is a player. On the surface, I find it hard to imagine that anybody out in the community would argue that the game master is a player. But then this conversation is ultimately going to go in the direction of, well, how are they different in some way than a player? Because they have a different title for one thing, and there's at least one era in the development of RPGs which focused on very strong game master authority over their game. So my mind went back. I started to think about, how did I learn about the role of the game master initially? Like, how was this communicated? And of course, it was initially communicated by the person who introduced me to RPGs, telling me how they were played. So he told me, you're going to create a character and you're going to role play them as they go through adventures, something like that. And then he said, and I, referring to himself, I'm going to be the dungeon master, because this was a long time ago, and pretty much the only option for play where we were was Dungeons and Dragons. So I'm going to keep using the term game master throughout this clip, because RPGs are a lot more than Dungeons and Dragons now. But at this time, understand that he was talking about being a dungeon master. So he was talking about creating the adventures, building the world. He was talking about running the game. So even in these early days, 83, he was talking about running the game. And I say even then, because I recently, as recently as this morning actually, read a quote from Gygax, in isolation, granted. But I read a quote from Gygax which really stuck out to me, because it comes out in full support of the sort of open, collaborative play as a basic, as a foundational aspect of role-playing gaming, which is not really how I remember remembering Gygax around the time I was leaving D&D and getting into other games. Now, of course, his influence over the game at that time was minimal and blah, blah, blah. But the idea is, I think our perception of gaming is very cyclical. And I think there's so many things that were lost from the early days of gaming as people tried to encode the process into understandable rules that could be read. Right? The easiest means to communicate them to the largest number of people was to write them and print them and distribute them. But text has its limitations, and it has specific limitations if you don't know how to write what it is that you're trying to write. Technical writing is a distinct skill, and for something as complex as a game, you need that skill. So as we get farther and farther from the source, and as the source becomes more and more understood by all the people who've been playing it and playing it and playing it for years and years and years, what we're expressing in text doesn't always match what we're actually doing at the table. So the language that we use becomes really important. And if I use run, thinking in my head, operate, right? Being the person who's responsible for putting mechanics in motion, like roll percent, right? Roll a d6. If I think of that as running and I write run, I probably don't explain that anywhere in the text that I'm writing. I don't define my term. And worse, if I do not have skill as a technical writer, I do not use my terms consistently. I instead go for variety to make my language more interesting, more colorful, easier to read. Easier to read, but not easier to understand. And so, someone else might interpret run as control. I run it. I run this organization. I run this game. Same word, same basic effect in play, but a very distinct difference in implementation. I run the game. So, when I started out playing in Dungeons & Dragons, it was very, very collaborative. It became less so over time. We took more control. We became responsible for more and more rules. This wasn't in and of itself a bad thing, but it was a distinct change from our early days of play to our later days of play. And you can see this in so many games until we get to the GM-less games. So, the Game Master as a player, I don't think it was ever in doubt. The Game Master is a player who, one of the earliest things I remember reading is that a Game Master is a specialized player who, and then it described the responsibilities, the extra duty of the Game Master to the play group. It also suggested that everyone should take a try. But Game Master is a player, yes, and why do we play? We play to have fun. Yes, the Game Master should be having fun. Even in games that you, from your perspective, think are too difficult or too heavy, too complicated. Somebody likes to play in that way, and someone is deriving a lot of enjoyment from handling all those details. That's why they have agreed to be a Game Master again and again. So, I hope this response contributes something. Is the Game Master a player? Definitely. Is the Game Master owed as much fun as everyone else? Definitely. Is the group responsible for the group's fun? Definitely. If someone is bringing down, some lone individual is bringing down the fun of the group, it's on them to shape up or ship out. It's not the Game Master's game. It's the group's game. You get out of it what you put into it.